One of the most heartbreaking epidemics lies within the United States, this being that they rarely go a few days without a mass shooting. In the US, there has been over 400 mass shootings in 2023 alone, several of which have occurred in schools or educational establishments. Since 2020, America has had more than 50 fatal school shootings, not including any other gun-related incidents in these establishments, which resulted in serious harm or injury. In comparison, the United Kingdom has had a total of 0 school shootings since the tragic events that unfolded in a small Scottish town in March of 1996. As a result of the horrific events that occurred that fateful day, UK gun laws changed forever, enforcing much tighter regulations on school security and gun control, banning private handgun ownership across the entire country. As a result, there have been no mass shootings in the UK in over 27 years. If you were to mention Dunblane to anyone from Scotland, their first thought would be towards the events that unfolded on the 13th of March 1996, a day which forever changed the lives of the families of 16 children and 1 woman, not to mention the monumental impact the tragedy had across the Scottish nation and beyond. Gwen Mayer was a 45-year-old mother of 2 and was happily married to Rodney "Rod" Mayer, a mechanical engineer and Gwen's childhood sweetheart. She grew up in Lancashire, England, alongside her parents and her sister, before graduating from Nottingham University in 1971 with a degree in teaching. Gwen then moved with her husband to Bridge of Allan, near Stirling in Scotland, and then to the sleepy town of Dunblane, where she was appointed as a primary school teacher there. Gwen was bubbly, outgoing, intelligent, and artistic, and was known to be incredibly selfless and kind. She loved to dance, write poems, eat out with friends, visit the theatre, and she enjoyed swimming and aerobics. By 1996, she had been teaching at Dunblane Primary School for 8 years, and during the 1995-1996 academic year was assigned to teaching Primary 1 pupils. For those unfamiliar with the Scottish schooling system, primary school is for children aged 5 to 11 years old, with the Primary 1s, or P1s, being for the youngest students between the ages of 5 and 6. All the way through to Primary 7 for children aged between 10 and 11. Following this, pupils would normally then go to high school for between 4 and 6 years, being able to leave school between the ages of 16 and 18, but unfortunately for some, they would never make it that far. The morning of March 13th, 1996 started like any other day for the families of the Primary 1 children who attended Dunblane Primary School. Parents and guardians got their children up and dressed into their school uniforms. They ate breakfast, brushed their teeth, packed their bags, and went on their way to school, before the parents themselves headed to their own respective workplaces. It's a routine every single one of us are familiar with in one way or another. For 16 parents, however, that morning was the last time that they ever saw their child alive. 28 pupils from the P1 class started their day in a school assembly before heading to the gymnasium, or the games hall, as more commonly referred to, alongside their teacher Gwen Mayer, Mary Blake, who was a supervisor, and the PE teacher, Aileen Harold. The gym itself was a separate building to the main school. The children, who were all between the ages of 5 and 6, loved their gym lessons, many flourishing during their sessions. It was during this particular lesson, however, that the most unthinkable happened. An unknown man wearing glasses entered, dressed in combat fatigues, firearm goggles and ear protectors. He then started shooting rapidly and at random with a handgun. Within walking just a few steps, the man had already killed one child and injured several others. As he moved towards the east side of the hall, he fired 6 shots before heading towards the west, where he fired a further 8. He then moved towards the centre of the gym, where a number of children were incapacitated from earlier shots, and he fired 16 more times at point-blank range. The children screamed as bullets were fired, several of them running away and trying to hide from the gunmen. Aileen Harold, the PE teacher, was shot multiple times in the arms and chest as she tried to protect herself from gunfire. She ran into a storage cupboard alongside 4 children, who tried to hide from the perpetrator, he himself continuing to shoot sporadically across the room. The assistant, Mary Blake, was also shot 4 times, in the head and both thighs, before also hiding in the open-plan storage cupboard alongside Harold and the 4 injured children. Gwen Mayer, who was, by all accounts, an adored teacher at the school, was shot approximately 6 times, killing her instantly whilst trying to protect the children in her care. Meanwhile, the gunman continued his rampage. A primary 7 pupil passed the gym having heard loud bangs and screams, and the gunman fired a shot at them through a window. However, luckily, the pupil managed to escape with mere cuts from the shattered glass. The perpetrator continued to shoot a further 24 times at random and in various directions. Several children lay injured, others dead, with blood smeared across the gym floor. The gunman then exited the gym briefly through a fire exit and shot 4 more times in the direction of the library cloakroom, with one of the bullets injuring another member of staff, Grace Tweddle. The perpetrator then shot towards a mobile classroom, which housed primary 7 pupils and their teacher, Catherine Gordon. Gordon instructed her class to get down on the floor as 9 shots were fired through the classroom. Thankfully, on this occasion, nobody was hurt. The perpetrator then re-entered the gymnasium, dropping the pistol to the floor before switching to a revolver. He placed the barrel of the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, instantly killing himself. As the scene unfolded, the deputy headmistress assistant, Agnes Olsen, alerted the headmaster, Ronald Taylor, of hearing screams coming from the games hall building and having witnessed what appeared to be bullet cartridges on the ground. Taylor was aware of loud noises, but initially believed it to be from a nearby builder's site. Following Olsen's concerns, police were contacted at 9:41 a.m, where it was reported that a gunman was on school premises. Ron rushed towards the gym to assess the situation, and after discovering the horrific aftermath of the shooting, having cradled some of the victims in his arms, ran back to his office and requested for the headmistress, Fiona Eddington, to call for ambulances at approximately 9:43. Within minutes, staff at Stirling Royal Infirmary were told of the tragedy and made preparations for the vast number of casualties needing treatment. Within 14 minutes, the first ambulances arrived on the scene, and by 10:04, staff from Dunblane Medical Centre arrived to assist, followed by staff from Callander and Doon Medical Centres. Medical teams from Stirling Royal Infirmary arrived at the scene by 10:15, followed closely by more assistants from Falkirk and District Royal Infirmary, who arrived at the school around 10:35. By 11:10 a.m, all of those who were injured were taken to Stirling Royal. However, another child passed away en route. Due to the number of adults and children injured, several were sent to other hospitals for treatment, including Falkirk Royal and the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in Glasgow. After word about the shooting began circulating around the locality, worried parents and news outlets flocked to the primary school to see what was going on. Panicked parents desperately wanted to find their children to make sure that they were safe and unharmed in the incident. But for some, their lives would never be the same again, and the events of that day would haunt them forever. Within the 3 to 4 minute duration of the shooting incident, a total of 32 people were injured, some with life-changing injuries. And of the 28 children in the games hall that morning, 16 were pronounced dead. During a press conference at 11:15 a.m, police initially confirmed that 13 children had passed away. However, by early afternoon, the death toll had reached a total of 17. 16 children and their teacher, Gwen Mayer. That night, in another press conference at 9:45 p.m, the identities of the children who died were confirmed, their loved ones being left inconsolable and grief-stricken following the loss of their children. They were identified as follows. Abigail Joanne McLennan, aged 5. She was nicknamed Abby and Munchkin McLennan. She was friends with her classmate Joanna Ross, and the pair used to swap their packed lunches. Abby spent her first years in Singapore and was amazed when she saw her first snow in Scotland. She was known for her sunny smile and her laugh, being very outgoing, sociable and sweet, often showing kindness to others, family, friends and even animals. Victoria Elizabeth Clydesdale, aged 5, was described by her parents as bright and beautiful. She had a rash that morning, but despite her parents wanting her to take the day off sick, Victoria didn't want to miss her favourite gym lesson. Sophie Jane Lockwood North, aged 5. She adored the family cat, who she named Kit Kat. She was an only child who had lost her mother to breast cancer when she was just 3 years old. She lived with her father Mick and was friends with her classmates Megan Turner, Hannah Scott and Emily Morton. Ross William Irvine, aged 5. He loved the fox from the series The Animals of Farthing Wood and was described by his grandmother as a dear little man. His family had only recently moved to the area. Mary Isabel McBeath, aged 5, described as a happy girl full of vitality. She was lively and enthusiastic to learn. 5 months prior to her death, her father died from a stroke, and on that particular day, her mother was due to attend a memorial for him, yet another cruel twist of fate. Melissa Helen Curry, aged 5, was best friends with her classmate Charlotte Dunn and was described by her parents as a little darling and every parent's dream. She was sweet and caring. Megan Turner, aged 5. She was bubbly and energetic and loved the gym. She was friends with her classmates Sophie North and Hannah Scott. Both Turner and Scott's mothers were close, and that relationship also reflected in their children. Megan won a Bonnie Baby competition when she was younger, and when asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she told her parents that she wanted to be an angel. Kevin Allen Hassel, aged 5, was described as quite an impish character, known for his cheeky nature, and was full of fun. Kevin was described as a mischievous yet lovely wee fellow who got on with everyone. Kevin shielded his friend Robbie Hurst from the gunman and ultimately died to protect his friend. Robbie initially tried to pull Kevin and another classmate into an alcove to protect them, but ultimately Kevin was fatally wounded, and Robbie escaped from the gym physically unscathed. John Alexander Petrie, aged 5. He was best friends with Brett McKinnon, another classmate, and was described as being a lovely wee boy with a cheeky face. He loved tractors. He was an only child and had moved to Dunblane just 6 months prior. Joanna Caroline Ross, aged 5. She loved laughing and smiling. Popular amongst her peers, she was known as Jojo. She was best friends with classmate Emma Crozier, and the pair were inseparable. They'd been baptised together and became friends swiftly afterwards. Joanna lived a few doors down from her classmate Brett McKinnon, and the two were often seen playing together. Hannah Louise Scott, aged 5. She was friends with Sophie North and Megan Turner, and she loved to draw. Hannah was described as bubbly, happy and chirpy by her parents, a neighbour describing her as the most popular girl in their street. Emma Elizabeth Crozier, aged 5, was fun-loving. She was best friends with Joanna Ross, and the pair did everything together, such as Sunday school, going to church, and generally just spending time together. Emily Morton, aged 5, was described by her father as wild and noisy. She was also friends with her classmate Sophie North. David Charles Kerr, aged 5, was known to love to play, run and giggle. He also loved his favourite cuddly toy, which was later placed beside him in his coffin. The Catholic priest Canon Basil O'Sullivan helped David's devastated family identify him. He said that David was dressed in white and looked like an angel. Quote, "It was as if he had been dressed for his first communion. He was so beautiful." Charlotte Louise Dunn, aged 5. She had moved to Dunblane just 6 months prior to the tragedy and was due to move to England, where her parents were originally from, just days after the massacre occurred. Charlotte loved to laugh and dance the Highland Fling, which she actually learned at school, much to the surprise of her English parents. That morning she kissed her father goodbye, something which she never normally did, a memory which would forever be cherished. Charlotte was best friends with classmate Melissa Curry. The oldest of the children who died was 6-year-old Brett McKinnon, a boy who loved Power Rangers and playing with his friend John Petrie, often riding their bikes together. Brett always enjoyed himself, and his family described him as always looking immaculate, but he was a typical wee boy, too. The children who died were more than just names in a list of victims, more than a photo in the newspaper. They were children who meant the world to their families and those who loved them the most, children who made an impact on the world. It's important to remember the children for who they were, not just by knowing their names. They had personalities, hobbies, and quirks. Despite having only lived for a short while, it's important to remember that. What happened that March day sent shockwaves across the country and the world. Media all flew to Scotland to report on the tragic events that unfolded in the sleepy Stirlingshire town. Minutes of silence were held during various sporting fixtures, including the Old Firm football match between infamous rivals Celtic and Rangers, who played just days following the Dunblane Massacre. Several vigils, prayer sessions and memorials were held at Dunblane Cathedral, where thousands upon thousands left flowers and teddy bears in memory of those who had lost their lives. On March 17th, which was Mother's Day, Queen Elizabeth II and her daughter, Princess Anne, attended a memorial service at Dunblane Cathedral to offer their condolences to the victims' families and visited a number of survivors in the hospital. Despite the flood of support for the families from across the globe, nothing could give them any comfort during their time of grief. The residents of Dunblane were in mourning, and yet were outraged. The question at the forefront of everyone's minds at the time was simple. Why? The gunman was swiftly identified as Thomas Watt Hamilton, a 43-year-old failed businessman and shopkeeper who became the focus of several reports from parents and children alike that he had behaved inappropriately towards young boys during his time in positions of authority at several youth clubs in the 1970s, including the Boy Scouts in Stirling, where he resided, just 5 miles from Dunblane. The police were involved after it came to light that he had half-naked photos of young boys, which were taken without consent. According to various reports, Hamilton made some of the Boy Scouts sleep very closely to him in his van during their outdoor excursions, which made them feel extremely uncomfortable. Because of these various complaints, Hamilton was removed as a scout leader due to suspicion of his moral intentions towards the boys. As a result, he was also blacklisted from ever being involved in the Scouts organisation again. Despite this, he tried to gain a position in a scout group in Clackmannanshire following this, but he failed. Some documents from the Dunblane inquiry, which were released just before the 10-year anniversary of the tragedy, further revealed accusations of inappropriate behaviour towards young boys at a summer camp in Loch Lomond in 1991. Hamilton blamed these so-called rumours as the reason as to why his business had failed miserably in 1993, this being written in several letters sent to news outlets and people of power across the country. These letters were received the following day, on March 14th, by the Scottish News TV channel STV, various MPs and even the Queen. It was likely that Hamilton had sent them the day of the massacre. Hamilton was convinced that he was subject to persecution by the local authorities and the Scout movement in regards to setting up youth clubs for boys. He believed that they had a vendetta against him and was desperate to be reinstated in the youth clubs and the Scouts. On the morning of March 13th, neighbours saw Thomas Hamilton scraping ice from his van at approximately 8:15 a.m. at his home on Kent Road, Stirling. He arrived at Dunblane Primary School at approximately 9:30 a.m, where he parked his car near a telegraph pole in the car park. He exited his vehicle before grabbing a pair of pliers from the back of his van, which he subsequently used to cut cables at the bottom of the telegraph pole. He then proceeded to walk towards the school before entering through a door located by the girls' toilets and the gymnasium on the northwest side of the school. On his person were 4 licensed handguns, 2 9mm Browning HP pistols, and 2 Smith & Wesson M19 357 Magnum revolvers. He also owned 2 rifles, but he did not take them with him. He was carrying 743 ammunition cartridges. Hamilton fired 2 shots at the stage in the hall and the girls' toilet near to where he entered the school before entering the gymnasium, where he shot and killed 17 people, 16 of whom were under the age of 6. Many knew of Hamilton and his inappropriate behaviour around young boys in particular. However, when his identity was revealed to the public, it still shocked many that he was capable of such a violent and mindless act, especially against the most vulnerable citizens in society with firearms. It came to light that as a youngster, Hamilton attended a rifle club, something that he continued to do into his adulthood, and he managed to obtain licenses for various firearms. Due to the fact that Hamilton's actions at Dunblane occurred with licensed firearms, there was an uproar amongst the public, calling for stricter regulations in regards to licensing and owning guns. In May of 1996, an inquiry was launched into the Dunblane Massacre. As a result of the inquiry, which was spearheaded by Baron Cullen of Whitekirk, William Cullen, the Cullen reports recommended the government in the UK should enforce tighter controls on handgun ownership and question whether an outright ban on gun ownership would be in the public interest. The proposal did reiterate, however, that licences would remain for gun clubs. They also wanted to enforce school security changes, which would be put in place to protect all children and staff from any unwelcome visitors from entering the premises. This also included doing background checks on anyone working with children under the age of 18. The Home Affairs Select Committee agreed that stricter rules needed to be enforced in regards to gun ownership, but they did not believe that a full-out handgun ban was necessary. In June, a petition was launched by the parents of the children who died, demanding that Westminster change the gun laws. The petition, which was known as the Snowdrop Petition, gained over 700,000 signatures from the public. They demanded action. By February of 1997, the Prime Minister at the time, John Major, introduced the Firearms Amendment Act 1997, which banned all cartridge ammunition handguns with the exception of .22 caliber rimfire across England, Wales and Scotland. Following the general election later that year, with Tony Blair being sworn in as the new Prime Minister, he introduced a second Firearms Amendment Act 1997, which banned the .22 caliber hand weapons as well. Out of respect for the victims and their families, a court placed a 100-year closure order on sensitive documentation regarding the case, including the post-mortem reports of the 16 children who lost their lives, but also all information held regarding Hamilton. This information will not be released to the public until 2097. Some of the families challenged this order, feeling that the public had a right to know the information, especially regarding Hamilton, concerning the accusations regarding inappropriate behaviour towards young boys and his past involvement with the police. Understandably, the victims' families were angered by the fact Hamilton was not investigated thoroughly following these accusations. If appropriate actions had been taken, the children under his care in the Boy Scouts and in other youth organisations could have been protected. The few documents that were released a decade after the massacre also revealed that Hamilton had previously been reported to the police and Child Protective Services. He was sent to the Procurator Fiscal regarding a consideration of 10 charges, including assault and unlawful actions against minors and young people. However, no further action was taken, and Hamilton was allowed to retain his firearms licence, despite the accusations in themselves being enough to revoke it. If Hamilton had been convicted of a criminal offence, he would never have been able to obtain a firearms licence. In 2004, Mick North, the father of the victim Sophie North, accused the police of a possible cover-up in regards to the case. This was due to the Collins inquiry failing to address 6 main points. This included the fact that for Hamilton to drive from his home to Dunblane Primary School should have only taken him approximately 15 minutes. However, that morning it took him 45 minutes, meaning that there was a half-hour window unaccounted for. Another point needing addressing was the fact that a number of witnesses, including one of Hamilton's neighbours and an off-duty police officer, were not called upon to give evidence at the inquiry. It was also noted that police were often seen outside of Hamilton's residence, but the reasons why are concealed under the 100-year order. The inquiry claimed that their reasoning behind this was to protect the children's identities, but some believe that these documents were sealed in order to protect the reputation of various officials. Understandably, many parents were outraged by the fact that Hamilton was not investigated earlier regarding his history with guns and inappropriate behaviour. His actions were never met with consequences. If he had been punished accordingly by the authorities, the events that unfolded at Dunblane Primary School could have possibly been prevented. The primary school itself was reopened on March 22nd, and on April 11th, 1996, the gymnasium was demolished and made into a memorial garden. Another memorial garden was erected in Dunblane Cemetery 2 years later in 1998, where Gwen Mayer and 12 of the children are buried, with a fountain and a plaque depicting the names of those who lost their lives. Several stained glass windows to commemorate them were placed in 3 different churches across the town and in the local community centre, depicting the likes of doves for those who died and snowdrops for the survivors. A commemorative standing stone also lies in the nave of Dunblane Cathedral. The town came together to say farewell to Gwen and the children, with an average of 600 people attending each funeral service. Following Gwen Mayer's act of selflessness and great courage in her valiant efforts to protect the children in her care, she was posthumously awarded the Queen's Commendation for bravery. The headmaster of Dunblane Primary School, Ron Taylor, paid his respects at the funeral of every single child and his colleague. Amongst the floral tributes and teddy bears lying outside of the cathedral sat a particular teddy, which read, "The day God overslept." The school incident, as the locals refer to it, remains a dark part of Dunblane's past, but despite the locals trying to move on from it, it seems that the town will be forever tainted by it. Many Scots, including ourselves, who grew up in the months and years following, do not recall the first time we heard of the Dunblane Massacre. We simply grew up knowing about it and the impact it had. For Scotland and for the UK, one mass school shooting was enough to say no to guns. Our children don't go to school, fearful that they might not come home. They feel safe there, as do the teachers and other members of staff. We don't live in a world where gun crime is acceptable. Much has been achieved in the wake of this heartbreaking event in regards to stricter gun laws and school security measures. It's important to admire and acknowledge the strength of the victims' families who fought tooth and nail for these changes. They weren't going to take no for an answer. It is a legacy that those 16 children and their teacher have left behind, in the hopes that something similar never happens again on Scottish soil. To conclude, a very poignant poem, which was read at 6-year-old Brett McKinnon's funeral, with the Reverend reading The End by A.A. Milne. When I was 1, I had just begun. When I was 2, I was nearly new. When I was 3, I was hardly me. When I was 4, I was not much more. When I was 5, I was just alive. But now I'm 6, I'm as clever, so I think I'll be 6 now, forever and ever.